From a distance, the set of Kuma looked like a clock everyone could trust. Call times were met, marks were hit, and the day moved forward with the neat precision that only a seasoned crew can create. But behind the scaffolding of lights and the sheen of perfect professionalism, the people who spend their days listening to breaths between lines began to notice something you won't find on a schedule. It was a current running quietly between Gökberk Yildirim and Cemre Arda. Subtle at first, easy to explain away, then suddenly not so easy anymore. It started where these things always start, in the soft edges of rehearsal. He would glance up from the script just as she looked over, and both would pretend to return to the page. They laughed a little longer than the joke deserved. The blocking would finish and they would linger at their marks, trading a comment about a prop or a bit of staging, and then trade another, and another, until the assistant director's voice had to pull them back. No one truly minded, after all, chemistry sells on screen. But this felt like something that breathed on its own, even when the cameras were cold. When the takes were done for the day, the crew noticed how the conversations didn't stop. The two of them would drift into late talk near the wardrobe racks, leaning shoulder to shoulder against the wall as if the plaster itself was listening. Extras packed up, lights dimmed, yet their words kept spinning out with that easy, unforced comfort of people who knew they had stopped acting several minutes ago. The craft table was a convenient excuse, another cup of tea, another bite of something neither needed, just so they could stand there a few moments longer in the safe glow of rap. At first, people smiled and moved on. They'd seen co-stars click before. But whispers travel faster than dolly tracks. The hair team began to trade looks. The assistant who managed call sheets noticed how their schedules, when they overlapped, stretched the day. Wardrobe swore that Gökberk returned a jacket one afternoon smelling faintly of Cemre's favorite rose vanilla hand cream, and no one could decide whether to laugh or hold their breath. One hallway moment became a favorite retelling. They were walking in opposite directions, each with a different scene keyed in their minds, and as they passed, their shoulders almost brushed. It was nothing, the kind of near-collision people pull off 100 times a day on a set. But he offered a quiet apology with a smile that reached his eyes, and she replied with the kind of smile that forgets to be polite and grows warm instead. In those 3 seconds, something unguarded flashed between them. It wasn't the kind of spark you engineer for a close-up. It was deeper, softer, and it left an imprint on anyone who happened to be looking. Then came the night everything tipped. The production was running late, pushing a difficult scene with rain effects well past midnight. Cemre had wrapped hours earlier. She should have been home, showered, asleep, and already forgetting the shape of that day's lines. Yet when the final shot was called for the sequence, she was there, quiet as a breath near the edge of the set, watching. Someone from lighting, packing gels into bins, noticed and asked why she hadn't left. She smiled, that small, nervous smile that says more than a paragraph could, and said she had promised to return a script note to the director. Nobody believed her. The note could have waited until morning. What couldn't wait, apparently, was the need to make sure Gökberk didn't step into a chilled night alone. He spotted her just as the director yelled cut for the last time. Surprise flickered, then gratitude, then a softness he didn't bother to mask. Cemre took a half step forward and stopped herself, as if talking too quickly might let something slip. He crossed the distance for her instead, thanking her in a voice low enough that it belonged to neither character they were playing. If anyone had been close enough to hear, they would have caught the tremor those words carried. Publicly, they were careful. Cemre, always gracious with crew, sidestepped any prodding with a practiced ease, delicate but firm. She avoided leading comments, refused to let her smile become a headline, and knocked any speculation off its axis with a quick joke. Gökberk, who has always kept his private world locked behind an iron gate of discipline, doubled down on routine. He was early to call, precise on coverage, a model of focus. But even the strongest routines crack when someone walks by and turns winter into spring. Every time Cemre passed his line of sight, the temperature changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious. It was just warmth that refused to be staged. Rumors don't ask for permission. They arrive, fill the silence, and make themselves at home. The story truly exploded the day an assistant reported something that was either ordinary kindness or the most intimate act of restraint. Behind one of the set caravans, out of the wind and patter of a sudden drizzle, the assistant said she saw them standing close enough to share the quiet. Cemre looked upset, the kind of weary that comes from a day of heavy scenes and a night of heavier thoughts. Gökberk wasn't performing or posing, he was simply present. He held her hand. Not possessive, not dramatic, just a steady clasp that told its own story. The assistant didn't linger. She kept walking, heart pounding, suddenly aware she had passed into a moment that wasn't meant to be witnessed, a moment that looked less like scandal and more like shelter. By lunch, that observation had multiplied into a dozen versions. Some swore they saw tears glistening. Others insisted they were only discussing a script beat that had gone wrong. A few whispered about secret messages, a private code only the two of them could understand. Between plates of rice and disposable cutlery, a narrative was being built, brick by careful brick, and every brick said the same thing: whatever lived between them was no longer content to stay on the page. Producers heard the hum and did what producers do. They called brief meetings that emphasized focus and reminded everyone why they were here. Work first, gossip never, eyes on the prize. A polite memo slid into inboxes asking staff to keep personal conversations to a minimum during shifts. The tone was calm, almost parental. But, as anyone who has ever tried to hush a rumor knows, the very act of quieting it can make it sound louder. And while the team restored the facade of absolute professionalism, the spark between Gökberk and Cemre had already become the unspoken headline nobody could stop reading. The questions wrote themselves. Was this a forbidden romance sneaking its way through the seams of a tightly run production? Was the blazing chemistry they delivered into the camera simply truth wearing a costume? Or was it something even deeper, an understanding, a pull neither of them had planned to honor yet, because admitting it would change too much too fast? Inside this storm of careful glances and measured words, both held on to who they were. Cemre is not naive, she knows what it means to be watched. She chose silence not because she had nothing to say, but because she wanted to say it to the right person at the right time, not to the echo chamber of a restless set. Gökberk has built a career on self-control. If he was going to step toward her, he would do it deliberately, fully aware of the marks that move would leave on both their lives. They weren't teenagers slipping notes. They were two professionals with an audience far beyond the lens, weighing every heartbeat like a decision. The crew felt it most in transitional moments. A reset between takes when everything briefly goes still. An elevator ride down to the studio lot when the lights are trying to find their brightness again. There, in small silences, something tender would surface, a glance that lasted a beat too long, a joke shared in a voice about half a whisper, a hand that almost lifted to touch and then respectfully fell back. The restraint did not make the feeling weaker. It made it stronger, because you could see how much effort it took to keep it contained. There were rumors of a planned intervention, nothing dramatic, just a conversation framed as a check-in. But it didn't need to happen. Before anyone could coordinate it, Gökberk and Cemre seemed to step back ever so slightly, as if they had both recognized the heat and agreed to guard it. Their scenes stayed electric. Their professionalism never faltered. They reined in the after-hours talk and trimmed it to a minute here, a nod there. And yet, the current didn't die. If anything, it learned to live in the quiet where it could not be easily misread. On a rainy Thursday, a day the schedule swelled with complicated group scenes, a tiny moment crystallized why no one could look away. They were waiting for a camera reset, and the room hummed with the impatient energy that fills a set when minutes get heavy. Cemre wrapped her arms around herself against the studio chill. Without a word, Gökberk took a step closer, just enough for his presence to block the draft. He didn't touch her, didn't offer a jacket, didn't risk an action that would give anyone a headline. He simply stood there, a quiet windbreak, and she exhaled like someone who had been holding her breath too long. It was so small that it could have passed unnoticed. But the sound recordist saw it, the gaffer felt the air shift, and the moment anchored the whispers into belief. When rap was called that night, the producers did what they had to do. They reminded everyone, again, to keep eyes forward. Their words were calm, their smiles practiced. Yet even they understood what was breathing beneath the protocols. Every great series is built on a tension you can't buy. And here it was, walking across their lot, learning its steps. The truth is, not all stories demand a confession to be real. Sometimes the story is the pause, the care, the decision not to rush what could be, the honesty of two people who know the cost of being seen and are still kind to each other in the spaces where no one is supposed to be watching. Maybe it was a romance waiting for a door to open. Maybe it was friendship forged under fire. Maybe it was the ache of a possibility that both of them were trying to protect from turning into a rumor before it had the chance to become anything else. Still, one thing was undeniable to anyone working the long hours of Kuma. The bond between Gökberk Yildirim and Cemre Arda had a voltage that did not fade under fluorescent lights. It was the kind of charge that could launch the show into the stratosphere, the kind of story audiences feel even if they can't name it, because truth, however carefully hidden, finds a way to glow on screen. And it was also the kind of tension that could summon a storm no one had planned for, a sudden front rolling in from clear skies, demanding choices from people who had tried so hard to keep their hearts off the schedule. So the set went on, the camera rolled, the scripts were marked, and everyone pretended it was just another week of work. But every time they took their places and a director called action, something larger than the scene guide slipped between the lines. You could hear it in the silence before the first word, feel it in the stretch of the beat after cut. Whether it was a secret love, a flicker of something still being named, or a feeling both of them were not yet ready to admit aloud, the result was the same. Kuma had found a pulse, and it was beating where the lens could see and where it couldn't. And on that set, where truths are borrowed and borrowed truths become legend, nobody could deny the obvious anymore. This wasn't just acting. It was a story trying to write itself.